Thank you, Bill, for those inspiring words. We will now invite Broadband TV News to join us for this session focused on Europe and the Middle East. Chris Juddle will provide an overview of the media market in this region. Then we'll go straight into the panel, which will be moderated by Julian Clover.
Welcome along then to our Europe and MENA panel session. As you can see, my colleague Chris Juddle is still with us, and we're joined by Samuel Lemercier, who is Managing Director for Globecast in the UK. He's also responsible for satellite sourcing. David Savico, who is the Senior Broadcast Manager of the IPTV operator Do, has joined us as well, as has Mitya Lovsin, who is the General Manager of STN, and of course you'll recognise Olivier Herson, who is Intelsat's Managing Sales Director. So let's get things underway. Okay, what we're going to do now is to have a little overview of the satellite market, particularly as it refers to in the Middle East and Europe and Africa as well. And to do that and to give his analysis is my colleague Chris Juddle.
Good morning. Right, so I'd like to run through a few details about the satellite markets in Europe and Middle East and North Africa. But perhaps we can start off by giving a general overview of what's going on in the market as a whole. Now, when we talk about the satellite industry, it is a huge industry, and people don't realize how much it's worth. Latest figures we have are for 2019, and it was actually amounted to $271 billion. Now, of that, TV revenues are certainly an important factor, but by no means the only one. In 2019, they accounted for $92 billion of service revenues. And they were actually much larger than, for instance, broadband or radio or fixed. Now, if we move on to the next slide, we can actually see that there are certain important trends taking place in the industry. We can move back a slide. The satellite industry actually contracted last year, or 2019, by 2.7%. Now, it's important to note that while some sectors grew, others actually contracted. And one of them, as we shortly see, was video. And there's actually a significant contraction. At the same time, all is by no means lost, because satellite operators are generally adjusting to the new reality. And they're looking for new markets, they're opening up new hotspots. And above all else, they're introducing new services. New services are coming on stream, and certain ones are actually driving the market, one of them being Ultra HD, for instance. But it's also important to note that linear broadcast is still key and remains very important for satellite broadcasters, despite the popularity of OTT services. Now, if we move on, we can actually see, looking at, say, the decreased revenues of leading satellite operators. Now, the most recent figures show that in 2019, combined revenues of the top 6 largest satellite operators actually fell by 15.1%. If you look at this, you can see that some of the operators did better than others. The sharpest fall was seen by EchoStar Hughes. Now, if we actually move on from here, we see that in terms of new services, Ultra HD is making a big impression already. To give you some figures, we actually have, for instance, Ultra HD channels were, there were 166 Ultra HD channels delivered via satellite in 2020. And the figures show us, projections show us that figure will rise to 1,100 by 2029. And you can see generally from this actual chart that the number of UHD channels is growing. The biggest growth is actually seen in HD channels, while at the same time SD channels are contracting. Next slide. Now, the number of Ultra HD channels delivered by satellite in Europe currently is 40 odd. Now, Intelsat is playing a key role in that delivery. And as you can see here, from the 1 degree west, 0.8 degree west position, we have 4 channels. And also there's one from 43 degrees west being delivered by Intelsat. All these channels we see are clear, and some of them actually originate in Central and Eastern Europe and 2 in the US. And there's generally more and more channels, Ultra HD channels, are being introduced by Intelsat and other operators, satellite operators in Europe and indeed the Middle East. And this is a trend that will continue. Next slide. Now, what I wanted to do is actually look at some case studies, because the market is generally changing. It's changing quite rapidly despite the challenges of COVID. And I wanted to look at some of the main companies that are operational in Europe and the Middle East. Companies that started off quite small in many instances, but have grown into huge players. First one is Sky. Next slide. Now, Sky started off back in the late 1980s as small-scale satellite operation in the UK. Now it is a huge operation owned by Comcast with some 24 million subscribers in 5 markets. Now, an important thing about Sky, right from the word go, and this is, we're talking over 30 years, it's been an innovator, and this has allowed it to grow. And right now, some of the latest innovations are in terms of 5G broadcasts. Sky Deutschland in Germany, along with Telefonica towards the end of last year, actually started testing 5G broadcasts. And this is one area where you can actually look for interesting developments in the future. And also, as far as Sky is concerned, despite COVID, it's more than holding its own. Customer relationships return to practically their pre-COVID levels at the end of 2020. But even large companies like Sky have setbacks. Last year, for instance, Sky had to close its OTT platform in Spain, which is a very highly competitive market. Next slide. Another case study, M7 Group. Next slide, please. M7 Group is based in Luxembourg, and it operates pay TV platforms across Benelux and Central and Eastern Europe. Now, up until about, 2 years or so, M7 had a pretty low profile, but since then it was acquired by Canal+, and it's actually expanded significantly, certainly in Central and Eastern Europe. Now, M7 is also something of an innovator, and this can be seen in its activities in certain markets. One of them being the Czech Republic, which saw its first DTT operation launched last year by Skylink, because again, it's by Skylink, which is M7 Group's operation in the country. M7 Group spotted an opportunity and it moved quite quickly to launch a DTT service. M7, again, it's a key client for 1 degree west, and although it operates at the 23.5 degree east position, Astras as well, and it also is highly committed to 1 degree west, which was evidenced by signing new channel agreements in 2020. Moving on again to next slide, please. Another case study, Cyfrowy Polsat from Poland. Next slide, please. Now, Cyfrowy Polsat is probably the largest pay TV operator in Poland. It was actually launched in the 1990s by what was then its parent company, Polsat, which was one of the first commercial broadcasters in Central and Eastern Europe, national commercial broadcasters. Now, Polsat, or Cyfrowy Polsat, is very much typical of a small company that's grown into something of a behemoth. Now it's the leading TV provider in Poland, satellite principally, but also it distributes its services terrestrially on the internet as well. And it is an OTT operator. And also it's grown to include other telco services. And again, it's moved into such areas as 5G. And growing from small, humble beginnings is principally, one of the main operators now in Poland across several markets. Next slide, please. Tricolor, next slide, please, is the largest pay TV operator in Russia and Eastern Europe. And most recent figures we have, it had just over 12.25 million subscribers. One of the interesting things about Tricolor is actually is a pioneer in ultra high definition services, certainly in Russia, but also in Europe as a whole. And most recent figures we have is that it actually operates 10 Ultra HD channels. And its subscriber base for HD services, Ultra HD services, is also growing quite quickly. At the end of last year, it had 250,000 subscribers. Now, being an important pay TV operator, the largest pay TV operator, it also strikes important deals with content providers. And as we can see here, most recent agreements were with Sony, Viacom, CBS, NBC Universal and BBC Studios. Now, certainly, again, Tricolor started with humble beginnings as an ordinary paid TV operator and has expanded to become an important player, overall player, through innovation as much as anything. Next slide, please. And we have finally Bain Media. Next slide, please. Now, Bain Media again started off with humble beginnings as Al Jazeera Sports, and it expanded quite rapidly. And although it initially covered sports, it quickly diversified to other areas, including movies and general entertainment. Bain Media is currently one of the 7 companies that make up the Bain Media Group. Bain Media Group itself has expanded quite significantly in recent years through acquisitions. Miramax, for instance, and Digiturk are 2 of its more recent ones. And the Middle Eastern and North African operation broadcasts HD channels exclusively in 4 languages, as in a key player in the region. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, really, we can say that the satellite industry is actually under pressure, with video revenues in particular in decline. But it's also proving to be resilient, especially in the post-COVID era. And certainly DTH platforms are diversifying their offers, whilst at the same time that it's important to note that linear broadcast remains the most important revenue source for broadcasters, and satellite offers the most reliable way for it to be delivered. And certainly the satellite industry, it's on the up. It has peaks and troughs, but certainly it's on the up in my view. And it's evidenced, for instance, by recent satellite launches. Intelsat Galaxy 30 has just come into operation, and Eutelsat HD, as Eutelsat has recently announced the procurement of a satellite 36D. So in my view, the future of the satellite industry is quite promising, despite the recent setbacks, certainly with COVID, and also video revenues, which are projected to again increase. Thank you very much.